Welcome to Heart of the Matter, the programme which is committed to telling you the truth about who must do what and why if the Palestine problem, the cancer at the heart of international affairs, is to be cured before it consumes us all. My guest this week is Stephen Rose, a neuroscientist and a biologist who has spent more than 40 years studying the brain and how it works. Unusually for a scientist, Stephen is outspoken on some political issues. He was politicised by growing up in a Jewish family in World War II Britain. He describes himself as anti-zionist, and he is a prominent supporter of the academic boycott of Israel. Way back in June 1967, I was the first Western correspondent at the banks of the Suez Canal with the advancing Israelis. Now, many years later, when I was writing about that war in my book, Zionism, the Real Enemy of the Jews, I found myself saying to readers that there were times when this Gentile wanted to cry out with the pain of knowing how much Israel's leaders and the Zionist lobby had deceived Israeli Jews and Jews throughout the world. And one of two main deceptions is, of course, the annihilation myth. The myth that Israel has lived in danger all its life of being driven into the sea. Now, the truth is that Israel's existence has never, ever been in danger. So I make to you the statement, because you're a brain specialist, I make to you the statement that Israelis, most of them, and most Jews everywhere, have simply been brainwashed by Israel's leaders and Zionism. Stephen, can this brain be unwashed? And if so, how?
Well, remember that I'm not just a neuroscientist, but I also was brought up as an Orthodox Jew in a Zionist household. I was brought up in a Zionist household which was taught, of course, that the establishment of Israel was a people without land who were going to inherit a land without people, that classical myth. Indeed, when you were on the banks of the Suez Canal in 1967, I was queuing up amongst other young Jews in Britain as a volunteer, not wanted, of course, because at that stage it seemed to me that indeed Israel was in danger of annihilation.
So you then were buying the myth yourself?
That was how I was brought up. And it wasn't until some years later, when I visited Israel in 1975, and I had, if you like, an epiphany, an understanding of what actually was going on there. So yes, an entire population, particularly of Western Jews, particularly of European Jews, was brought up with that particular belief, with the belief that plucky little Israel, the David, was fighting the Goliath of the overwhelming preponderance of the Arab armies around it. At that stage, we didn't recognize that there was a Palestine, there were just Arabs, and that was it. So the brainwashing, if you like, or the ideology is something that was very, very powerful. And I think certainly amongst Jews in the diaspora, it's now begun, at least in Europe, to wear off, but it's taken a hell of a long time so to do. If you go to Israel itself, then the Israelis, I think, are very conflicted about this. And at the same time, they recognize their own power, and they have a sense of the terror of the world around them. And until and unless Israel can accept that it is a Middle Eastern state, and it is not a suburb of Chicago, a suburb of Manchester, an appendage of Europe, the last vestiges of European colonialism against a colonized people, then that will remain.
Let's come back to the Jews of Europe and the Western world. You were saying they might be questioning the mythology a little. Now, the other thing they've been conditioned to believe is that the 700,000 Palestinians who left Palestine when Israel was created left voluntarily.
That's what we were told.
That's what you were told. In answer to the call from Arab leaders to leave a clear field of fire for the incoming Arab armies.
Indeed.
Now, the truth of history is that they were dispossessed of their rights, their land and their rights, by Zionist terrorism and ethnic cleansing. Now, my question, Stephen, is this. Do the Jews of Europe and America not know this truth? And if they did know it, would they then want justice for the Palestinians? Or do they not want to know it, and if not, why not?
I certainly can't speak for the Jews of America. I suspect that for many Jews, at least in England, they both know it and don't know it at the same time. So
Now, can you explain that to me in some depth? I mean, that's a riddle.
Well, I think that you know things and you don't want to know them. You believe them and you partially believe them. Well, it was partly true, but it was also the case, of course, that they were asked to get out of the way of Glub Pasha's Royal Jordanian Army back in 1947. The other line, of course, is the line of at least one of the ex-new historians, like Benny Morris, who says, yes, of course it happened, but it was justified. And I suspect you will also find that there are a fair number of people, Jewish people in this country or elsewhere in Europe, who would say, okay, if it happened, it was justified. It was essential that we actually found a place for all those desperate survivors of the Holocaust. And that Holocaust myth, which is Israel has traded on so extensively over the course of certainly the last 40 years, if not before then, is something that is very powerful, and it remains.
Let's come right back to this, because I have my Gentile feeling is this, that the bottom line reason why most Jews of Europe and America are silent on what I think you and I would both call Israel's crimes regarding the Palestinians.
Unequivocally.
The real reason why they're silent is because deep down, if only in their subconsciousness, they fear Holocaust too. Not gas ovens again, but shorthand for another great turning against Jews. So in that sense, they see Israel as a refuge of last resort, a sort of insurance policy. So they say to themselves, and are told to say, don't criticize Israel, you know, we can't put this at risk. Could that explain this silence?
That's certainly what those Zionists and the Zionist lobby, which criticizes those of us who've taken a stand on the boycott and so on, do say. They say we need Israel for this purpose, but you never forget that actually, after all, the Israeli Jews who actually have this Anglo-American, this European-American experience, are a minority of the Jewish population even in Israel itself. And for those who come originally from Arab countries, or the Mizrahi Jews who have been there for many generations, then the Holocaust is not their myth, it's not their story, it is the story only of the Europeans, and yet it has become the dominant story of Israel, in the same way as the ex-European Jews, the Ashkenazi Jews, dominate all aspects of Israeli life, the military and politics.
I'd like to talk to you, Stephen, now about anti-Semitism. In 1988, there was a seminal book written by Jehoshaphat Harkabi, who was the longest-serving and the best and the brightest of Israel's directors of military intelligence. And he wrote in it, it would be a tragic irony if Israel was to become a factor in the rise of anti-Semitism. And he had this sentence, Israelis must be aware that the price of their misconduct is paid not only by them, but by Jews throughout the world. 20 years on, he wrote that in 1988, 20 years on, it's my Gentile view that Israel's behavior is a prime cause of the rise of, resurgence of anti-Semitism in the mainly Gentile, Judeo-Christian Western world.
I'm not convinced that there is a significant rise in anti-Semitism here, and I say this as someone whose earliest political memories